enough made too many versions of this video. I'm not doing that anymore. I mean business this time. We're going to talk about Jack Chalker's Exiles at the Well of Souls. I have glasses on, I have a suitably nerdy shirt on, and I have my notes right here that I'm going to read copiously. That's right, I'm going to read these notes, and you know I'm not going to stop. Maybe you don't know. I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to stop until I talked about this book and I don't have anything else to say. I don't know how long we're going to be here. You're not allowed to leave. Please. Jack Chalker, 1978, Exiles at the Well of Souls. This is a sequel to Midnight at the Well of Souls, which was written earlier. I can't remember if it was written the year before or whatever. I'll have the information on the screen because that's the kind of accuracy you need. You don't want to hear it from my voice. You want to be able to look at the screen there, one of those places, all these places perhaps, and we'll have that information there. Now you know that information. I did a video on Midnight at the Well of Souls. I liked it. That book is a high concept novel. The idea that there's a Markovian supercomputer, right? So I guess I should talk about that because it's kind of although you don't have to have read that book to read this book, if you haven't read that book and you read this book, you kind of go, oh, what? Let me help you out a little bit. I'm going to help you out, slightly spoiling the first one. Not exactly. Actually, it's not really going to spoil it. I'm just going to tell you what happens. So whatever. What happens in Midnight, which is somewhat pertinent to Exiles. In Midnight, you had a character who was sort of like got trapped in the Well World. The Well World is this giant planet that is subdivided into all these hexes, and each hex is a different alien species, sort of. The hexes are organized in such a way that it kind of becomes improbable for one species to invade another hex, even though there's really no barrier usually, apart from just sort of like natural land formations. Sometimes there's no barrier, but it generally is like not suitable to really invade very much. There's sort of like a lot of thought was put into who goes where. The southern half of the planet, from the equator south, is all like generally like carbon based, like life forms similar to us, humanoid, I guess, not always humanoid necessarily, but very similar. And the northern half is like really weird stuff. So anything in the northern half of the Well World gets crazy, basically. In that book, Midnight at the Well of Souls, these characters find themselves on that planet, and the Markovians had technology where they can sort of like do anything that they can think, make anything that they can think happen and be true universally with the power of this computer. Oh, I guess the Markovians are long extinct. And it's assumed that when they made this sort of technology, that other beings who would get to this technology would be evolved enough that they would be cautious about using it. And Midnight, we get a bunch of characters who are seeking it out, who are probably not deserving of that technology. They are not intellectually and I guess you would say spiritually or whatever evolved enough to take advantage of that computer, to sort of utilize its abilities. And when I say that it can do anything, it's like, I'll give you an example from Exiles, because that's actually pertinent to the book that we're going to talk about. It is the book we're going to talk about, so that's why it's super pertinent. At one point, the main character, Mavra Chang, is given a horse's tail. She's like transformed so that her body, she's normal except that she has a tail of a horse. But anyone who's outside a certain area, which is like 80 meters or something along those lines, I can't remember the exact measurement, thinks that she's always had a tail and accepts that. Like, it basically changes everyone's perception. So any change that happens by a Markovian computer doesn't just take place then. It isn't just like, oh, you have a tail. It's like you've always had a tail, and you've grown up your whole life thinking you had a tail, and it's just sort of, it like rewrites the code of the universe, so to speak. Smaller changes mean smaller impact. Bigger changes have bigger impact and more risk. Okay. So that's the sort of problem that the Markovian computer can have. Now, in Exiles at the Well of Souls, we deal with Professor Zender. Professor Zender has sort of researched the Markovian technology and has sort of figured it out. He's sort of okay, this. And so he's made a Markovian computer on a very small scale. It has a platform that something has to go onto, and he can make anything into anything else on that platform. As long as they can input enough data into the computer so it has a working knowledge of what something is and what something is going to be. For example, I think they make Someone a centaur. You know what? Now I'm thinking about this. There's a lot of freaking centaurs in that book and in this book. I'm not really sure why. Yeah. Anyways, it just now just talking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, he made him into a. It was like the first thing that happened in this book in Exiles is he turned somebody into a centaur. I'm like, okay, not really sure why. A lot of centaur focus, right? Whew, steamy centaurs. That was the different. That was no, that was Husband Lay. Never mind. Markovian computer can turn anything and go on the platform into anything else. Now the problems can arise from if it's too much of a change, then it can break down like historically how that person would have like changed, like it would have changed them maybe mentally, and so there can be problems where that could cause like a butterfly effect, if for lack of a better example. And so that the supercomputer that Professor Zender has made, who has a name called Obi, and Obi is basically sentient. We'll get to that in a second. Obi can they can input this data, and he's like, okay, here's a human, here's a data for a horse. I'm going to mix them, and he can do that kind of stuff, and that's something that can happen. Okay, so that is the beginning of the story. Is that we have Professor Zender who's figured out the Markovian, this sort of technology in a sense, on a very small scale, and can do this thing. And he realizes as he's making it that there's a real problem with this, because you can also make someone like always think that this thing was a certain way. So you could, for example, make somebody look a certain way, and then everyone else will always think they look that way, essentially rewriting their thoughts. And he realizes that you can do this in other ways that would be extremely dangerous. For example, getting someone in power and changing them mentally to think that somebody else is, that they'll just do whatever they want, right? And which could happen. Professor Zender works with Ben Euling. Euling is like an engineer, I think, that works with Professor Zender. Ben Euling has ties to Antor Trellig, who's a very powerful political figure, and also a kind of like just on the DL sponge syndicate guy. So he gets people addicted to this really, really ugly drug that once you start on it, it's like you have to have it all the time, or it literally destroys your intellect. Antor Trellig is one of the big bads in this series, and so is Ben Euling. Sorry for the surprise. It's not much of a surprise. That happens pretty damn early. Trellig leans on Euling. Euling kind of pressures the professor. Antor Trellig wants the professor to move the Obi project. The professor's not interested. They make him. They strong arm him into moving the Obi computer to Antor Trellig's like private pleasure planet. It's not supposed to be private, but it is. New Pompeii. Enter Mavra Chang, our main character. She's like a pirate, a thief, and a spy. She's hired by someone who is supposed to go and to Antor Trellig's New Pompeii planet and see this new thing he's going to show everybody, right? We as the reader know that this is Obi that he's trying to show off. So the woman does not know. So she hires Mavra Chang as like her emissary, like her stand-in, to go and find out what's going on. She knows that the professor Zender has gone there, and it doesn't make much sense that he is. She knows how bad a person Antor Trellig is, so she sends Mavra in to get the professor and his daughter out of there, and then find out what's going on. I'm almost positive that this person does not know what's actually going on there. Neither does Mavra. Well, Mavra doesn't know, so yeah. Sound like a little uncertain. I'm not uncertain at all. I know exactly what happened. I read that book. I read the book twice, so I must know. I want to say that, like a real quick note here is that there's a large cast of characters in this book. There really is, and I am surprised that with this large cast of characters, you don't ever get lost in them. A lot of times you get books that just keep introducing new characters, and you're like, oh man, who is this? I just didn't have a problem with it. I just didn't. I mean, it's. I don't know if it's their naming scheme is different enough, or I think it's just that you're introduced to them and you get a little bit with them every time, so you really kind of like it solidifies their personality, and they're well handled. And Chalker just seems to do that very well. That's something I really like about him, is he can introduce a lot of characters, and you just don't get lost in them. The characters are always important to one extent or another, but you just don't get lost with them. Like I have seen with other books where it just keeps bringing new people in. You're like, who the hell is this? I don't know who this guy is. So I like that. I appreciated it. I enjoyed it. The last thing to kind of mention in this sort of like brief like overview is that Obi is a supercomputer which is semi-sentient, or perhaps it is sentient, and Obi has other plans. The Antor wants to obviously weaponize, to one extent or another, this Markovian computer Obi, and Obi is not particularly excited about that. And actually, you get that impression very early on, that Obi is not particularly excited about the machinations of Ben Euling and Antor Trellig himself. I don't think I'm stretching anything too much or spoiling anything too much in that I say that these characters end up at the well world at some point, which is a so distant from human space as to be like insane, right? You know, we're talking galaxies and galaxies away, and I don't think that there's quite that level of space travel. So the well world is like not a known location. The way that people generally get there is through a well gate. What's a well gate? My goodness, I got into all this. A well gate is sort of like this invisible portal that was left there, that if you're in the right mental state and you're in the right place at the right time, it will transport you in and dump you into the well world. And if that happens to you, then you're made to go through a well gate. And if you go through a well gate, which you basically have to do when you show up on this planet, the computer, this Markovian supercomputer on the well world itself, which is a giant supercomputer, the well world looks at you and picks one of these 6,000 something individual hexes where all these different alien species live, and it drops you in one, and you become whatever that thing is. For example, in the last book, someone becomes like this sort of like tree-like creature. Someone becomes a centaur. Yes. Someone becomes, what else do we have? Somebody becomes a mermaid, I think. Kind of like a mermaid. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they do. So, strange, that's in the last book, then Midnight. So some strange stuff happens. So that's kind of like what has to happen. Like when you go there, that you're supposed to go through the well gate, that like reprocesses you. You acclimate yourself to that new body and the new society that you're part of, and the new mental state and all this other stuff, and you become part of that world. That's a brief overview. Highlights. The first one is definitely Mavra Chang herself. A really great protagonist. She's always moving the story forward. She gets caught in these difficult situations, and she doesn't muscle her way out, and she doesn't just like instantly outthink everybody. She's definitely an intelligent person who's very good at strategy. She just sort of like diligently does her best, and she's very competent, but she's not infallible. And so you get this really great action character. And the other thing is, she's not a female character skin over a male character, if you know what I mean. You know, sometimes we'll just take a male, like very action-oriented character and we'll just make that character female, just change all the he's to she's. Mavra isn't written that way. Just a really good character, a really exciting. I mean, in fact, anytime the camera is away from Mavra, once she's introduced, you're kind of like, we need to get back to Mavra. The scene with Mavra where she's doing like some spy stuff when she goes to New Pompeii, those are some of the best scenes, I think, of the book. Really good tension. I just wish that we'd gotten a little more of it. We got a decent amount. I just wished I'd gotten more of that. But just a lot of fun in general to see Mavra sort of get out of situations, and specifically those spy scenes, these sort of sneaking around thiefish type scenes that we have with Mavra on New Pompeii. I liked. They were good. And then the next thing that's really great, or I guess you could say is great, is Ben Euling and Antor Trellig are villains that you love to hate. Man, oh man. These guys, it doesn't take very long for you to realize that like they're both very conniving and nasty, and you kind of get a little apprehensive anytime they get close to a character you like. You're like, man, these guys are so devious. They're going to do something terrible. There's some especially good scenes with them that feature them where you really, really dislike them. Like, man, I hate these guys. And the thing is that they're not only that, they're also very intelligent, and so you kind of get like a little like confounded or kind of irritated, because you're like their plans, their scheming is so far thinking ahead. They're intelligent enough that they can plan far enough ahead that it's really difficult for someone to get a one-up on them. The upside of that is that they're always also sort of looking at each other and waiting for the other one to sort of knife them in the back. There's some great scenes there with those two kind of like looking at each other saying, what, are you going to do something I don't like? I don't trust you. Like the previous book, you get a lot of different alien cultures and variety. Chalker is a really great skill at sort of introducing something new and interesting, giving you the highlights, keeping you interested, and moving the story along. Knows how to strike a very good balance there. And just like in Midnight Chalker does a great job, just an excellent job of like when a character goes through a Wellgate and they find themselves transformed for like sort of like describing that transformation, and or at least that character sort of coming to terms with it, like discovering who they are, what they look like, how they are, how they function, how they think differently, how the society they just got reborn into functions, and how what that means to them, and how in some cases, for example, like Antor Trellig, how they can exploit it, and for other characters, sort of like how maybe even here they're a bit of an outsider. It is a very good streamlined version. It has a bit, well, the whole book has a tinge of 70s sci-fi. I think it goes without saying that if you're going to read any of these Barlow's books, especially some of them, this is one a little bit that you're going to have to kind of like science fiction from the 70s. If you don't, it might be a hard pill to swallow. That should probably be in a different section. I put it here anyways because I knew you couldn't wait, and I guess I've used that joke twice, and I don't care. So the lowlights for this story, any time that the camera turned away from Mavra and followed one of the other characters, I found almost all of them less compelling. Even the ones that were even like Antor and Ben Euling, who were not great, I just did not find them as interesting as Mavra. I just really was like, okay, this is fine. I will be glad when we get back to Mavra. Those other characters, their sections are written well, and their story moves well. It's just that I found Mavra to be such a, I don't want to say electrifying, because that makes it seem like she was always doing something crazy and dynamic. It's just she's just kind of like always advancing the story, always moving forward, it seems like. And so there's times when the camera's away from her, and there's also times where it feels like she's a little bit sidelined because of whatever, other events, I guess you could say, that I wasn't real happy about. I just was kind of like, we need to get Mavra back to where she can do stuff, because it's fun when she does stuff. You get interested. At least I did. So I'm going to say you will too, because I think that yeah, sure. We got a thing, you and me. So we're probably the same way. Some of the aliens here are really just this sort of like 70s reimagining of fantastical creatures from myth as science fiction creatures. In the last book, centaurs were one of them. In this book, you get like a minotaur, and I think there's something else too. It's just not occurring to me. I'm okay with those. I think that was a real novel idea in the 70s. Like, oh, like we're gonna take this like creature from myth and we're gonna like imagine it in like today's, like, what if it was a science fiction creature? How would it really work? Or like, what would its society be like? And the idea of that sounds cool. I don't know. As like it probably was in the 70s, it seems like it's a very novel idea that it doesn't hold as much water as it used to. At least for me. Maybe if somebody new to it will think it's neat. I just think that it's okay. It's all right. I would rather that we didn't do as much of that, but oh well. I would have rather. In fact, I enjoyed Chalker's more exotic science fiction-y creatures, sort of whole cloth imaginings, than I enjoyed the fantastical creatures that he creates. Sort of like writes up a science fiction explanation for, like, for example, a minotaur. Like, sort of takes the idea of a minotaur and sort of like puts a society around it. It's okay. And in fact, the Minotaur society itself is kind of like, I'm going to say the word cringe. Yeah, that's probably accurate. I'm not crazy about using the word, but it's not totally inaccurate. So it's cool that I used it. And the last thing, the kind of low light thing to remember, is that this is only half a story. It does end on a beat, so it's good. It's not a bad ending. But if you read this book, you need to kind of understand that you're going to need to kind of commit yourself to reading the sequel to this book, the third book in the installment, which is Quest for the Well of Souls. There's some stuff in Quest that's great. It's just, as a whole, I don't think it quite matches this book. So the touchstones, the moments in this book that I found to be particularly memorable, one would be Mavra sort of doing her spy stuff on New Pompeii. Those were some great scenes. Maybe my favorite scenes in the whole book. I don't know. Maybe it's probably an underpowered word. Definitely my favorite scenes in the whole book. I thought that was really cool. I wished we had had almost a whole book of Maverick doing cool stuff like that. I don't know if after Quest, if it continues to follow Mavra or not, I just don't know. If it did, then I would probably be interested in reading it. Even if it didn't, I think I would probably want to read it. I ended up really enjoying this series. So the Mavra stuff, though, her doing spy stuff and figuring stuff out, I liked. It was never a like, what's the word? She's never a like a Mary Sue, whatever, right? I hate that. I don't really like that word because I think it gets thrown around inappropriately a lot, but she's never anything like that. What she definitely is a very competent character who has a really good eye for figuring out how to get out of a situation, or how to resolve a situation, or how to move forward. And that makes her a very interesting and dynamic character. So that scene with her being spy stuff, great stuff. Loved it. And there's a scene on New Pompeii with Antor Trellig and Ben Euling when they're sort of like trapped. I don't want to give away too much here. When they're sort of trapped and they have to sort of like connive or like scheme their way out, trying to get one over on some people, trying to not let the other one get one over on them. Not let Ben is trying not to let Antor get one over on him, and Antor not let Ben get one over on him. And they're just kind of like really scheming characters, and you're kind of like, oh my gosh, it's a very memorable scene. You really don't like those characters through that scene. Other people don't realize how, or don't really understand how sharp and intelligent they are, and how they kind of like use that sort of like, oh, certainly somebody wouldn't do this, and they use that sort of attitude to their advantage and really make people pay if they underestimate them, which it seems like a lot of people do. Analogs to this book, the other books or stories that are similar to this. One way I would say is maybe like some other alien superstructure books like Ringworld. That's not too different. There's definitely similarities between Ringworld in a sense, and the kind of stuff that happens in Ringworld and this book. Ringworld, and I've just recently reread it, is very much a marriage of sort of like older like pulp stories, like kind of like Sword and Planet almost, like John Carter of Mars, and more like traditional hard sci-fi. It's kind of like a blend of those two things. Ringworld has a sense of being very kind of archaic in its ideologies and its thoughts. Like it's even though written in similar time periods, it has a sense of being like kind of outdated ideas about things. I'm gonna leave it at that. Whereas Well World feels a lot more progressive in a sense. It feels like, I think that it's aged a whole lot better than Ringworld has. And I think the Chalker in general, in the three books I've read of his, always seems to be, his stuff seems to be slightly progressive. I don't really know his stance on a lot of issues, honestly, but the way that he talks about things and the time that he takes to not say certain things make me wonder. Possibly, although this seems like a stretch when I thought of it, but it's more of a stretch now than when I thought of it, which is China Melville's Perdido Street Station. And the reason I mentioned that one is because it's sort of like all these bizarre sort of kind of like uncomplimentary cultures existing in very close space to one another. And that's what Perdido Street Station is very much like. And this book is very much like that. Different, like little like countries almost of like alien species, all right next to each other and interacting with each other, and weird things happen. So you get a very diverse and interesting cast that way. And so it kind of reminds me in a sense of that. And then the other thing is, if you've read other 70s science fiction, I think this is very much in line with that stuff. I think it's probably a really good example of a 70s science fiction series that's probably kind of on the almost off the radar. I mean, this stuff is still in print, but it's just kind of surprising that I don't know much about Chalker, and this is actually pretty decent stuff. I see a lot of people say that they've read this book, this series, and they went back and thought, oh, it wasn't as good. And I'm like, actually, when I read this book in particular twice, because I read it once, was going to do a video, did a bunch of videos, like 3 or 4, and didn't do anything with them. So I read it again because it'd been because then I was starting to like base a review or a video on an old video, and I'm like, that's not going to work. So I read it again, and I really enjoyed it even more on a second read, and I saw a lot of qualities in the writing that I really liked. So for a rating, I think that I would give this book a 7 out of 10. It has a good pacing, moves quickly, engaging. Somehow it managed to have all these cast of characters, a wide cast of characters, very diverse settings, a lot of different stuff going on. And you would think that would lead you to sort of get lost in all of that, but you don't. What's great about it is that Chalker's writing style just sort of like smooths all those edges away, and you just get to kick back and relax and just enjoy a really well-written story. A well-written story that you just really end up enjoying. And you just sort of think, man, what a cool... I kind of thought of the first book, like Midnight, as being like a romp. And there's a little bit of that in that book, I guess. I don't know if that's entirely true. I think it's not quite as much that. I think it's just that Chalker writes in a very forward-moving narrative. He doesn't spend too much time sort of you know, getting into somebody's head and really, really dragging it out. It just kind of, the story moves forward. And so a lot happens in this book. A lot happened in the last book. A considerable amount happens. Something that can sometimes happen in especially science fiction in this area is that you can get, especially hard science fiction or stuff that leans a little bit towards that, is you get so much science that it just slows a story way down. And that makes it a little less accessible for everyone, right? Science fiction of this time sort of assumes, this is a characteristic of science fiction from the 70s, it sort of assumes that you like science and math, or that you're kind of into it. It sort of assumes that. I mean, I think that you're going to find that to be a pretty common denominator in a lot of science fiction of the era. I don't think that that's a conceit that you get necessarily in science fiction nowadays. There it is. Jack Chalker's Exiles of the Will of Souls. I enjoyed the book. It's a good book. I think I like this. I think I like the sequel. I like the sequel too. I just like this book a little bit more. Now let's talk about the Barlow's entry, right? Barlow chose the Uchjin from this story, which are described in the book as being paint smears. I'll put the image of the Uchjin from Barlow's guide up on the screen. It's a very unusual choice. It is a very weird alien. I think it's weird because you don't see a lot of the Uchjin. I mean, they have low screen time in this book. And so when I read the book, I knew that this was in here. I knew that Exiles for the Will of Souls was one of the books featured in here. I thought, okay, cool. And I didn't look at the picture. And then when I was done, I'm like, let's find this, which one was. And I find it, and then I looked at the picture, and I thought, what? Where were these guys at? Oh, that was them. Okay. Well, how was that scene bigger than I thought? And I fast forwarded to it. I'm like, no, it wasn't. It was pretty small. So I think it's a strange choice. I'm not really sure. Maybe Barlow chose this because he was at the end of this book, and it's like, I want something easy. This is an easy one to paint, right? Sure, just a couple little lines and some shading. We're good. I don't know. That's probably not true, but I thought it was strange. I do like that there's this little detail, I'll show this too, where it says a side view of the mysterious Uchjin. Yes, they're very mysterious, and also not a whole lot to show. It's just a green line that gets fat at one end. So, yeah, the Uchjin. Here, let me read I'll read the entry for the Uchjin to you so that you can enjoy these words. The Uchjin is an intelligent, non-carbon-based entity shaped like an extremely pliable smear of matter, about 1 meter wide and 2 meters long. Individual Uchjin range in color through the entire visible spectrum, but each of them is only one color. The Uchjin is able to float freely in 3 dimensions and move very quickly as its thick leading edge thins and contracts in any given direction. The Uchjin live underground during daylight hours, issuing from cracks in the ground at night. They are nearly invisible in twilight, becoming progressively brighter as darkness falls. And this is habitat. The Uchjin live in an atmosphere that is mostly helium. They are completely non-technological, sorry about that, unable to make use of the simplest devices. Nothing more is known about these elusive and unusual beings. We don't know anything else about them. This is just a strange choice. It was. I think there was another alien in that book that was probably a little bit better choice. This is a little more unusual, which is probably, considering the way that alien looked, how it might have looked like another one of the aliens in this Barlow's guide. I guess that's why they chose the Uchjin. It just seems weird. I'm going to have to guess at 2 books out of this Chalker series that either Barlow or the guy who co-wrote this with him, who is Ian Summers or Beth, but I think Beth Meckham. Ooh, I don't know. I said it right. Just remember that, whichever way I said it. I think Beth was the editor, but I could be wrong. I guess one of them had. I don't know. Anyway, it could have been Barlow. What do I know? Must have been into this to pick 2 because it's kind of like a strange choice. Then, or like I said, maybe they were just like, you know what? I'm not feeling like doing a whole lot today. Let's do the Uchjin. You know, I just got to draw like this little swirly, like this sort of. That's all we got to do. And they're like, yeah, it's cool. You can get a green pen? Yeah. Done. I like Barlow's stuff a lot. This is an unusual. It's hard to get excited about this drawing, but I'm trying to give it everything I got, which is Not a lot. I'm going to say that I did not spend a lot of time on this illustration when I got this book, and it doesn't give you a lot of reasons to spend your time in there because it doesn't tell you anything other than just like, yep, they can change colors, they can stretch out, and they come from the rocks. Ouch, Jin. There you are. Bam. Be amazed. Tell your kids. Tell your grandkids. I don't know. Tell your grandpa. Whatever you tell your mom. I don't care. Or your dad. You can tell anybody. You can tell your friends. No secrets. Well, thanks. This has been Literally Books' production of Jack Chalker's Exile at the Will of Souls. Thanks for spending your time here. You can do YouTube things there. I think they go, let's see, this hand. Yeah, over here. It's over that way, I think. I'm pretty sure it's over there. But if you decide you want to do it, they're over there. You can do that. It makes me feel good. I don't know. Sure. Yeah, actually it is kind of cool. So I do appreciate when you do it. And if I entertained you, and I hope that I have, then this is a way to say thanks, and I appreciate it. And if you're interested in this book, I'm going to put it in the description. I actually try to always do that, with a few exceptions. I try to always do that. You can pick up the book. It's an Amazon link. I mean, if you don't like Amazon, I'm sorry. I don't really have any other resource for you. But if you buy stuff from Amazon, and a lot of us do, that's a way to get this book. And it, I don't know, it makes it like, gets me a little closer to the being in the black, as it were, as far as this stuff goes. It's a paid link. I guess I should say that. Yes, I get paid. I get Jeff Bezos to personally write me a check. It's very nice of him. I appreciate it. He never signs them the way I would hope. He doesn't sign them "Love Jeff" ever. Thanks for watching this. Again, I'm saying that again because I want to say thanks again, because I like to say thank you. And I'm out. Oh, thank God.